In the vast and unexplored expanse of the universe, there were many species far more powerful and ancient than humans. One such species was the Etherians, beings of unimaginable intelligence and beauty. Their empire stretched across countless planets, each one more advanced than the last. Yet, despite their overwhelming power, the Etherians had never once seen the potential of Earth's inhabitants, humans. Princess Alara, heir to the Etherian throne, had always been a symbol of perfection within her culture. She had been raised to lead her people with grace, wisdom, and strength. Her every decision was scrutinized by the royal court, her every move expected to reflect the grandeur of the Etherian legacy. But despite her apparent flawlessness, Alara harbored a secret, one that could change everything for her and for the Etherian Empire. It all began during a peace summit held on the neutral planet of Vectra, a place where Etherians and humans came together to discuss cooperation between their civilizations. Alara had attended these summits before, but this one was different. For the first time, she met someone who wasn't just a diplomat or a scholar, but someone who made her feel something entirely new. His name was Jacob, a human scientist who had been invited to the summit for his work on advanced energy sources. Jacob was nothing like the Etherian nobles she was accustomed to. He was not beautiful in the same way they were, his skin pale, his eyes a plain brown, and his hair dark and unremarkable. He was a human, one of the species the Etherians had always considered beneath them. Yet there was something about him that intrigued Alara. It wasn't just his intellect, although that alone had earned him respect in the scientific community. It was his quiet confidence, the way he didn't try to impress anyone, and his unique perspective on the universe. During the summit, Jacob spoke about the limitations of Etherian technology when it came to harnessing natural energy. He argued that humans, with their creativity and resourcefulness, had found methods that Etherians could never have imagined. Alara, who had been taught to view humans as inferior, found herself listening intently to every word Jacob spoke. His ideas were revolutionary, but what captivated her more than his brilliance was his passion, something Alara had never felt herself. In a galaxy where emotions were often seen as weaknesses, Jacob's unfiltered heart was something that stood out. Over the course of the summit, Alara found herself meeting Jacob in private, discussing everything from science to philosophy to their respective cultures. She admired his curiosity, his genuine interest in understanding not just her people, but the universe as a whole. For the first time, Alara questioned the rigid beliefs she had been raised with. Was the Etherian Empire truly the pinnacle of existence, as she had always been told? Or was there more to the universe than the prideful arrogance of her people? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she had been missing. The way Jacob spoke about human history, their struggles and triumphs, opened her eyes to the beauty of imperfection. The Etherians, with their flawless minds and bodies, lacked something that Jacob had, a deep connection to the world around him, an understanding of life's complexities and mysteries. By the end of the summit, Alara had made a decision that would change everything. She wanted to be with Jacob. It was a choice that defied the rules of her society, a decision that could cost her everything, her title, her future, and possibly even her life. But when she looked at Jacob, she didn't see a mere human. She saw someone who could make her feel alive in a way she had never known. As soon as the summit ended, Alara took Jacob aside, away from the eyes of the court, and told him how she felt. To her surprise, Jacob didn't hesitate. He confessed that he had fallen for her as well, not because she was a princess, but because she was unlike anyone he had ever met. Their bond was instant, something neither of them could deny. Word of their relationship soon spread throughout the empire. The royal court was shocked. A marriage between a royal Etherian and a human. It was unheard of, a violation of every tradition the empire had upheld for centuries. The nobility was scandalized, whispering behind closed doors about the disgrace this union would bring to the Etherian name. Yet, despite the backlash, Alara remained resolute. She had made her choice, and no amount of criticism or fear could change her mind. When the time came for the royal family to meet with the court, Alara entered the grand hall with Jacob by her side. Her mother, the queen, was seated on her throne, her regal form exuding authority and power. The moment her eyes landed on Jacob, a flash of disdain crossed her face. It was clear she had never expected this. The queen's expression hardened, and her voice was like ice when she addressed Alara. "Who is this?" the queen asked coldly, her gaze narrowing as she stared at Jacob. Alara, standing tall beside her husband, answered without hesitation. "The human I married." There was a stunned silence in the room. The courtiers were frozen in disbelief, their mouths agape. The queen's eyes blazed with fury, but Alara stood her ground. She was no longer the perfect princess everyone had once adored. She was a woman who had chosen to follow her heart, no matter the cost. The queen's voice trembled with disbelief. "Alara, this is madness. You are a princess and heir to the throne of the Etherian Empire. How can you marry a human? You are meant to lead our people, not disgrace them." But Alara, feeling stronger than ever, looked at Jacob and then back at her mother. "I am not defined by my title. I am defined by my choices. Jacob is not just a human. He is my partner, my equal, and I will not let anyone, not even you, take that away from me." The queen's eyes softened, but only for a moment. She had always prided herself on upholding tradition, on maintaining the purity of their people. The thought of her daughter marrying someone so far beneath her was a blow to her pride. Yet beneath her anger, a seed of doubt began to grow. She had never seen Alara so determined, so sure of herself. For the first time, the queen wondered if maybe, just maybe, Alara had seen something that no one else had. As the court watched in silence, Alara and Jacob stood united, a symbol of defiance against the rigid traditions of the Etherian Empire. They had chosen love over duty, humanity over arrogance. And though the road ahead would be difficult, Alara knew one thing for certain. Her heart had found its true path, and she would follow it, no matter where it led. The days following Alara's bold declaration were filled with tension. The royal court was not prepared for the shockwave her marriage had caused. Whispers ran rampant through the palace halls, and the nobles who had once admired her now regarded her with disbelief. It was unthinkable for someone of Alara's status to marry a human. In their eyes, Jacob was no more than an outsider, an inferior creature who didn't belong in their world. Despite the opposition, Alara was resolute. She had made her decision, and nothing could change her mind. Jacob, on the other hand, found himself caught in the middle of an empire that saw him as a curiosity at best, and a threat at worst. He had known that his relationship with Alara would face challenges, but nothing could have prepared him for the cold reception he received from the Etherians. Jacob was no fool. He knew that his marriage to Alara was not just a matter of love, it was a statement. A challenge to everything the Etherian Empire stood for. It was no longer about them as individuals, but about bridging two vastly different worlds. At first, Jacob's presence in the palace was met with a mix of pity and contempt. The nobles, who once spent their time debating matters of politics and science, now spent their time questioning how a human had gained the favor of their princess. Some even tried to convince Alara that she was making a grave mistake, warning her that marrying a human would not only bring disgrace to her family, but would also weaken the Etherian Empire. But Alara refused to listen. She would not be swayed by their opinions. She was no longer the obedient daughter of the queen. She was a woman in love, standing by the man she had chosen to marry. To her, Jacob was more than just a human. He was a symbol of the possibility of change, a reminder that there was more to life than power and pride. Jacob, for his part, tried to remain humble. He had never imagined he would be in such a position. Coming from a small, quiet world like Earth, he had never dreamed that his life would be entwined with a princess from a distant star system. Yet here he was, surrounded by beings who had achieved unimaginable advancements, and still they seemed so distant, so foreign to him. They were perfect in every way, or so they thought. He had always been fascinated by the Etherians, by their advanced technologies, their elegant cities, their long history of exploration. But as he spent more time with them, he began to realize that their perfection came with its own flaws. They were a people who had never known true struggle, who had never felt the weight of failure or the challenge of rebuilding. To them, the idea of learning from mistakes was foreign. They viewed themselves as the pinnacle of existence, and that belief had made them stagnant. As the days passed, Jacob found himself spending more and more time in the royal archives, poring over the wealth of knowledge that the Etherians had accumulated. It wasn't long before he found himself fascinated by the technologies they had developed, the complex systems they had created. Yet, despite all their advancements, he could see that the Etherians were missing something, something humanity had in abundance. That thing was creativity. Humans, Jacob believed, were naturally inclined to think outside the box, to take risks and experiment. The Etherians, on the other hand, had become too comfortable in their superiority. They had forgotten the value of curiosity, of failing and trying again. The more Jacob thought about it, the more he realized that the Etherians had reached a point where they no longer cared about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Jacob's mind was constantly working, thinking of new ways to solve problems that the Etherians had long since stopped trying to solve. One day, he brought a proposal to Alara, a plan to develop a new kind of energy source, something that combined human technology with Etherian principles. He believed that by using the raw resources found on Earth and combining them with Etherian energy systems, they could create an energy source that was more efficient and sustainable than anything the Etherians had ever imagined. Alara was intrigued, but she knew it would not be easy. The court would never approve of such an idea. The Etherians were proud of their advanced technology, and the notion of incorporating human knowledge into their systems was considered a threat to their pride. But Jacob was determined. He believed in the power of innovation, and he knew that if he could just get the right people to listen, he could prove that humans had something unique to offer. Despite the challenges, Alara stood by Jacob's side. She knew that his ideas had the potential to change everything. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose beyond her royal duties. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was an advocate for a new way of thinking, a champion for the possibilities that lay in bridging the gap between their two species. As Jacob worked tirelessly on his proposal, Alara began to see the cracks in the Etherian system. She attended more and more council meetings, listening to the heated debates between the nobles. They argued about everything from resource allocation to military strategy, but there was always one common thread: fear of change. The Etherians were afraid of losing their status, afraid of being surpassed by another species. And to them, Jacob was a reminder of that possibility. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Alara and Jacob sat together in the palace gardens, overlooking the shimmering city below. The stars twinkled above them, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. Alara turned to Jacob and spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if we're the ones who are wrong?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've always believed that the Etherians are the pinnacle of existence, but what if we're limiting ourselves? What if we're not as perfect as we think we are? What if there's more to the universe than just our pride and our power?" Jacob looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," he admitted. "It's like we've become too focused on perfection, on achieving everything. But maybe what really matters is the journey, the mistakes, the learning, the growth. Humans might not be perfect, but we're always trying to better ourselves." Alara nodded, her heart swelling with admiration for the man beside her. "I think you're right. Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's time for the Etherians to learn something from humanity." As they sat together, the weight of their world's expectations hung heavy in the air. But for the first time, Alara felt a sense of hope. She wasn't alone in her desire for change. Jacob had shown her that there was more to life than just power and tradition. There was the potential for growth, for discovery, for something greater than any of them had ever imagined. The days that followed were filled with both hope and fear. Alara continued to stand by Jacob's side, encouraging him to present his proposal to the royal court. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that it was the right thing to do. Jacob's ideas were revolutionary, and she believed that if the Etherians could see beyond their pride, they would realize that humanity had something valuable to offer. But as the day of the presentation drew closer, the tension in the palace grew. The queen, who had once been the epitome of grace and strength, now found herself at odds with her own daughter. She couldn't understand why Alara would risk everything for a human. To her, Jacob was a symbol of weakness, of imperfection, and she couldn't bear the thought of her daughter choosing him over the Empire's legacy. The stage was set for a confrontation, and Alara knew that the future of the Etherian Empire and her marriage to Jacob would depend on the outcome of this one moment. The days leading up to Jacob's presentation were filled with a sense of urgency. In the quiet chambers of the royal palace, Alara and Jacob worked tirelessly, preparing for the most important moment of their lives. Alara knew that the outcome of this presentation would determine not just their future, but the future of the entire Etherian Empire. Jacob's proposal was ambitious. He had developed a new energy source, a combination of human technology and Etherian principles that he believed could revolutionize the empire. It was an idea born from necessity, something humans had been forced to develop because they didn't have the luxury of relying on advanced technologies like the Etherians did. Jacob had taken the raw materials of Earth and combined them with Etherian energy systems, creating something entirely new. Alara could see the skepticism in the eyes of the court. The Etherians had long believed that their technology was superior to anything humans could offer. They viewed themselves as the masters of the universe, their advanced knowledge and power unmatched. The idea that a human could present a solution to one of their most pressing problems was a direct challenge to that belief. But Jacob wasn't intimidated. He had spent his entire life thinking outside the box, coming up with solutions that no one else had thought of. He had always believed that innovation came from taking risks, from pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And now, in front of the most powerful beings in the universe, he had a chance to prove it. The day of the presentation arrived, and the royal court gathered in the grand hall, its high ceilings and marble floors creating an air of grandeur. The nobles and military leaders took their seats, whispering amongst themselves. They all knew what was at stake, and the tension in the room was palpable. Alara sat next to Jacob, her hand resting on his, offering him silent support. She knew that his success or failure would affect them both. Jacob stood at the front of the room, a nervous but determined expression on his face. He was a human in a room full of Etherians, but he didn't let that stop him. He took a deep breath and began his presentation. At the heart of this proposal is a new energy source, Jacob began, his voice steady. One that combines human ingenuity with Etherian principles. This new energy source is based on the fusion of two elements, one from Earth, the other from Etherian technology. Together, they create a power source that is both sustainable and efficient. He paused, allowing the room to absorb his words. The nobles exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. Some looked at him with curiosity, while others regarded him with disdain. To them, Jacob was just a human, someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of Etherian technology. But Jacob pressed on. He pulled up a holographic display, showing intricate diagrams and calculations. He explained how the fusion process worked, how the energy generated from Earth's natural resources could be enhanced by Etherian technology. He showed them how this new energy source could provide clean, unlimited power for the entire empire, eliminating the need for the dangerous and inefficient methods the Etherians had been using for centuries. As Jacob spoke, Alara couldn't help but notice the reactions of the court. Some were still skeptical, their faces cold and unyielding, but others seemed intrigued. They were beginning to see the potential of Jacob's idea. His words were clear and logical, and his confidence was infectious. Even those who had been the most vocal in their opposition seemed to be listening more closely now. Jacob finished his presentation and stood there, waiting for the court's reaction. The silence in the room was deafening. The queen, who had been sitting with her arms crossed, leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on Jacob. "You expect us to believe," the queen said, her voice sharp, "that a human has discovered something we could not. That you, someone from a species with no history of space exploration or advanced technology, have found a solution to our energy crisis." Jacob didn't flinch. He had known this question was coming, and he had prepared for it. He took a deep breath and answered calmly. "I understand your skepticism, Your Majesty," he said. "But this isn't about me or my species. This is about the idea. This energy source is the result of human creativity, something that the Etherians might have overlooked in their pursuit of perfection. The Etherians have focused so much on refining existing technologies that they haven't considered the possibility of integrating different ideas. Humans have always had to adapt and innovate, and that's what I'm offering, an opportunity to adapt, to grow, and to push the boundaries of what we can achieve." The queen's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. She looked around the room at the other nobles, who seemed divided in their opinions. Some were nodding, while others remained skeptical. The tension was thick, and Alara could feel her heart racing. She knew this moment could go either way. If the court rejected Jacob's proposal, It would be a major blow to both their future and the future of the Empire. But if they accepted it, it would be a victory for innovation and a step toward bridging the divide between their two worlds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the senior nobles spoke up. "I believe it's worth testing," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We have nothing to lose by experimenting with this new energy source. If it works, it could be a game changer for the Empire." The other nobles murmured in agreement. Alara's heart lifted as she saw the shift in the room. It wasn't a unanimous decision, but it was a step forward. Jacob's idea was no longer being dismissed outright. The court had agreed to test it to see if it could truly deliver on its promise. The queen, however, was not convinced. She stood up, her posture rigid with authority. "Very well," she said, her voice cold. "We will proceed with this test, but I warn you, Jacob, that if it fails, you will have made a grave mistake. The Etherian Empire does not tolerate failure. Do not forget that." Jacob nodded, his expression unwavering. "I understand, Your Majesty. But I believe in this idea, and I believe it can work." Alara watched as her mother turned and walked out of the room, her face a mask of displeasure. The rest of the court followed suit, their whispers filling the air as they filed out of the grand hall. Jacob turned to Alara, a relieved smile crossing his face. "Well, that went better than I expected." Alara laughed softly, squeezing his hand. "It's not over yet. The test is just the beginning." As they left the hall together, Alara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The Etherian Empire was beginning to change, and she was proud to be a part of it. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be many challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt that humanity had a place in this galaxy. And with Jacob by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The days following Jacob's successful presentation were filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The Etherian Empire had never been one to embrace change easily, especially not when it came from a human. Jacob's proposal had been met with mixed reactions. Some nobles were cautiously optimistic, while others continued to doubt the value of a human's ideas. But despite the skepticism, there was no turning back. The test was set to take place, and Jacob was determined to prove himself. Alara stood by Jacob's side throughout the preparations. She had seen the hard work and dedication he had put into his proposal, and she believed in him. She had always known that Jacob was different from the other humans she had met. He was driven, creative, and above all, he had a deep belief in the power of change. It was these qualities that had drawn her to him in the first place, and it was these same qualities that would carry them both through the challenges ahead. The test was scheduled to take place in one of the Empire's most advanced research facilities, a massive complex that housed some of the most cutting-edge technology in the galaxy. It was here that Jacob's energy source would be put to the test, and its success or failure would determine the future of his ideas. Jacob spent hours working with the Etherian scientists, explaining his concept in detail and helping them set up the necessary equipment. Despite their initial resistance, the scientists had come to respect Jacob's knowledge. They were beginning to see that his approach, while unorthodox, had merit. Alara watched from the sidelines as Jacob led the team, his confidence growing with each passing hour. The day of the test arrived, and Alara couldn't shake the feeling of nervous excitement that hung in the air. The research facility was bustling with activity, and the energy was palpable. Nobles, scientists, and military leaders filled the observation decks, their eyes fixed on the central chamber where Jacob's energy source would be activated. Alara stood next to her mother, the queen, who had been unusually quiet throughout the preparations. "Are you nervous?" Alara asked softly, glancing at her mother. The queen's gaze remained fixed on the chamber ahead. "I don't believe in luck," she replied, her voice cold. "Either it works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, we will have a problem." Alara nodded, understanding the weight of her mother's words. The stakes were high, and the failure of Jacob's proposal could bring devastating consequences to both him and the Empire. Yet, despite the tension, Alara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Jacob had never wavered in his belief that this energy source could change everything, and she believed in him just as she always had. The countdown began, and Jacob entered the chamber, his heart racing with anticipation. Alara could see the determination in his eyes as he stood before the control panel, surrounded by Etherian scientists. They all knew what was at stake. If this energy source worked, it would mark a turning point for the Empire, a shift away from the old ways and toward something new. But if it failed, it could set them back years, even centuries. Jacob activated the machine, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. The room held its breath as the machine hummed to life. The energy readings began to climb, slowly at first, and then more rapidly. Jacob's hands hovered over the controls, adjusting the settings as the energy output increased. Alara watched, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment of truth. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. The Etherians in the observation deck exchanged nervous glances, their eyes fixed on the readouts. Even the Queen, who had remained stoic throughout the preparations, seemed to be holding her breath. Then, without warning, the lights in the chamber flickered. The machine sputtered for a moment, and a low hum filled the air. Alara's heart skipped a beat. Had it failed? Was this the moment they had all been dreading? But Jacob didn't panic. He remained calm, his fingers flying over the controls as he made adjustments. The energy readings stabilized, and the machine hummed steadily. Slowly, the room began to relax. The energy output continued to climb, higher than anyone had anticipated. The machine was working. Alara's eyes met Jacob's through the observation glass. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, his eyes filled with relief. The test was a success. The room erupted in applause, but Alara hardly heard it. Her heart was still racing, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just a victory for Jacob, it was a victory for humanity. It was proof that they had something valuable to offer, that they weren't inferior, that their ideas could change the world. The Queen stood, her expression unreadable. Alara couldn't tell if she was angry or impressed. The nobles in the room began to speak in hushed tones, discussing the implications of the test. Some were clearly impressed, while others seemed less convinced. But one thing was certain, Jacob's energy source had made an impact. As the applause died down, Jacob turned to face the crowd, his expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Alara joined him, stepping into the chamber to stand by his side. The room fell silent once more as all eyes turned to them. "I want to thank you all for your support," Jacob said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is not just my achievement, it's a shared success. The Empire and humanity are not so different after all. We both have something valuable to offer, and together we can build something greater than either of us could alone." There was a pause, and then the Queen's voice rang out, cold and imperious. "This is not over yet, Jacob. You have proven your point today, but the road ahead will not be easy. The Etherian Empire is not accustomed to change, and your proposal will face many challenges before it is accepted." Jacob nodded, unfazed. "I understand, Your Majesty, but I believe in this. And I believe in the future we can build together." The Queen's eyes narrowed as she regarded him. "We shall see," she said softly, before turning and leaving the chamber, her court following in her wake. Alara watched her mother go, a mix of emotions swirling in her chest. She knew her mother wasn't convinced yet, but Jacob had proven that humanity had a place in this galaxy. She had always believed in him, and now, more than ever, she knew that their future together was worth fighting for. As the crowd began to disperse, Alara turned to Jacob, her face glowing with pride. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jacob smiled, his exhaustion evident. "We did it," he corrected gently, taking her hand in his. "This is just the beginning." And as Alara stood there, looking out over the empire that had once seemed so distant and unyielding, she realized that change was already happening. The Etherian Empire would never be the same, and neither would she. There was still much work to be done, many challenges to face, but for the first time she felt a sense of hope for the future. Together, she and Jacob would forge a new path, one where humanity and the Etherians could work together, side by side, to create something better than either had ever known before. And no matter what obstacles they would face, Alara knew that their love and their shared vision would carry them forward.